It often seems that the Crusades were wars waged by fanatics, adventurers, and bandits. We're familiar with Reynold of Chatillon, who pillaged for gold, and Richard the Lionheart, who thirsted only for glory. But what happens when the greatest crusade of the 13th century is led by a genuine saint? Not an adventurer, not a politician, but a man who washed the feet of beggars, wore a rough hair shirt beneath his royal robes, and believed he could retake Jerusalem through the power of prayer alone. His name was Louis IX, King of France. And this very sanctity, his pure, unclouded idealism, led to the most deafening catastrophe in the history of the Crusades. Brace yourselves for a story about the tragedy of an idealist. Today you will learn why Louis IX decided that God had personally commanded him to launch this war, how his first success, the effortless capture of Damietta, convinced him of his own infallibility and led him straight into a deadly trap. We will uncover the truth about the Battle of Mansurah, how his brother's recklessness and the genius tactics of a new enemy, the Mamluks, destroyed the finest army in Europe. The humiliation, how God's anointed was taken prisoner and forced to bargain for his life, paying a ransom equal to the entire annual budget of his kingdom. And why, 20 years later, he once again led an army on a campaign that ended with his death from plague on the shores of Tunisia. This is the story of a man who tried to be a saint in an era that demanded cynics. He proved himself a brilliant king and administrator at home in France, but in the East, his piety became his fatal weakness. The world had changed. The era of Saladin and Richard had passed. New, far more ruthless forces had taken the stage. Slave warriors known as Mamluks, who knew neither chivalry nor mercy. And Louis IX marched against them with an army armed with faith. This is the story of Saint Louis, the last idealist of the Crusades. The year is 1244. King Louis IX of France has turned 30. He's the most powerful, wealthy, and respected monarch in Europe. He rules a kingdom at the absolute peak of its power. And in this year, he falls gravely ill. This is not a simple sickness. It is dysentery of such violence that the court is already preparing for his funeral. According to chroniclers, one of his court ladies attempted to cover his face with a burial shroud, convinced that life had left him. His breathing stopped. The kingdom held its breath. And then, when all seemed lost, Louis suddenly drew a breath. He came back to himself, and the first words he whispered were not asking for water or his family. He demanded that they bring him the cross. The Bishop of Paris, weeping with joy, placed the crucifix in his hands, and Louis, barely alive, swore an oath. He vowed that if God granted him a full recovery, he would lead a new crusade. When news of this spread through the palace, no one rejoiced. His mother, the formidable Blanche of Castile, who had ruled for him while he was a child, was horrified. His advisors begged him to renounce the vow, claiming it was made in delirium. They saw disaster looming. The king whom France desperately needed was leaving for the ends of the earth in a senseless war. But Louis remained unyielding. Inside him lived not a politician, but a fanatic and an idealist. He didn't just want to go. He genuinely believed that God had saved him for this singular purpose. This was not a campaign. It was his personal, sacred duty. The vow is made. But Louis is not Reynold of Chatillon. He is not an adventurer. He is the greatest administrator of his age. He spends 4 years preparing. For 4 years he collects taxes, builds a fleet, and stockpiles provisions. He constructs a specialized port, Aigues-Mortes, in the south of France. It became the most expensive, organized, and meticulously planned enterprise in history. In 1248 he sets sail. But his target is not Jerusalem. Louis is far from naive. He realizes the truth that had dawned on his predecessors. The key to Jerusalem lies in Cairo. To win, one must break the enemy's spine, and the enemy is the Ayyubid Sultanate in Egypt. In June 1249, his gigantic fleet arrives at the shores of Egypt, at the very same city that was the target of the Fifth Crusade, Damietta. The Egyptian army waits for him on the shore. It seemed the battle would be a bloodbath, but Louis, not waiting for his knights to disembark, jumps from his ship into water up to his shoulders in full armor and is the first to rush at the enemy. And the Egyptian army breaks. The garrison of Damietta, seized by panic, simply torches the storehouses and flees the city. Louis IX, without losing a single man, captures the most heavily fortified stronghold in Egypt, and this incredible, deafening success became his primary trap. He decided this was not tactics. He saw in this event a sign from God. June 1249. Louis IX is in Damietta. The victory was so easy, so bloodless, that the entire army, and especially the king, sees providence in it. They are certain God is on their side. Victory is foreordained. But this hubris leads to the first decisive mistake. They wait. Instead of attacking Cairo immediately, while the enemy is in panic, Louis decides to wait out the flooding of the Nile. He waits 5 months. 5 months during which the Egyptian Ayyubid Sultanate manages to recover from the shock. They execute the commanders who surrendered Damietta. They assemble a new army. And, most importantly, they bring into Egypt elite regiments of slave warriors, Kipchaks from the steppes, the Mamluks. A different adversary stood before them now. These men were nothing like the warriors of Saladin. They knew neither chivalry nor fear, and their tactics were lightning fast. In November 1249, Louis's army finally marches toward Cairo. Their objective is the fortress of Mansurah, but their path is blocked by a canal. And here, in February 1250, catastrophe strikes. A local resident shows the French a ford across the canal. Louis devises a plan. He will cross with the main army to establish a beachhead, while the vanguard, led by his brother Robert of Artois and the Templars, is to cover the crossing and wait. But Robert of Artois, hot-headed and vain, sees a fleeing Egyptian detachment. He smells an easy victory. He wants glory. The Grand Masters of the Templars and Hospitallers beg him to stop and wait for the king. "It's a trap!" they scream. Robert laughs in their faces. He accuses them of cowardice and collusion with the enemy, and, violating the king's direct order, he screams, "Charge!" The vanguard of the French army, its finest elite unit, rushes in pursuit. They burst into the city of Mansurah, and the trap snaps shut. The Mamluks, commanded by a cunning general named Baibars, remember this name, were waiting for exactly this. They block the narrow streets. They rain stones and boiling water down on the knights from the rooftops. The battle turned into a merciless slaughter. Robert of Artois was killed. Almost all the Templars and Hospitallers who rushed to save him fell in battle. By the time Louis IX crossed with the main army, his vanguard no longer existed. Louis IX, the Saint King, stands on the bank of the canal, his best troops destroyed by the vanity of his own brother. He is trapped. The Battle of Mansurah is not just lost, it turns into an 8-week siege, but now it is the French being besieged. The Mamluks drag ships overland and cut off Louis's army from their fleet on the Nile. They cut them off from Damietta. They cut them off from food. And hell begins in the Crusader camp. Not from swords, from disease. Dysentery, typhus, and scurvy mow down the army. Chroniclers write that there were not enough living men in the camp to bury the dead. Meat for Lent runs out, and they eat eels that have been feeding on the corpses floating in the river. The Saint King himself was no exception. He lies in his tent, sick with dysentery, to the degree that, according to eyewitnesses, he was forced to cut away part of his trousers. The army that left France as a shining ideal of faith has turned into a rotting, dying lazaretto. In April 1250, Louis IX, King of France, God's anointed, orders the retreat. But it is already too late. April 1250. The retreat of Louis IX's army is not a retreat. It is an agony. The army, rotting alive from dysentery, cannot even burn its bridges behind it. They are too weak. The Mamluks, led by Baibars, catch up to them and unleash a massacre. One of the king's sergeants, seeing that all is lost, rushes into the tent where Louis lies in agony and, "Sire, we are all dead!" The King of France, the anointed of God, the most powerful monarch in Europe, is taken prisoner, not by a sultan, but by slave warriors, the Mamluks. He is shackled in chains. He, the Saint King, is thrown into a prison house where he lies in filth, rotting alive from dysentery. The defeat on the battlefield was a crushing blow to faith itself. Where was God? Why had he abandoned his most faithful servant? And while Louis prays in chains, a coup takes place in Cairo. The Mamluks, intoxicated by victory, murder the Ayyubid Sultan. They seize power. Louis is now a prisoner not just of an army, but of a new, ruthless military dictatorship. They demand a ransom, a colossal one, 800,000 gold bezants, 400,000 livres, the annual revenue of France, and, in addition, the surrender of Damietta. Louis agrees. He bargains for his people. And when asked what ransom he will pay for himself, he replies, "A king of France is not bought with money. I will give the city of Damietta for my freedom, and the 800,000 bezants for the freedom of my army." Even the Mamluks, assassins and slaves, were so impressed by his dignity that they lowered the price. In May 1250, he gained his freedom. He surrendered Damietta. He paid the first installment. Thousands of his knights were dead. His treasury was empty. His dream was trampled. So Louis IX is free. His army is destroyed. His brothers are dead or in disgrace. His faith has undergone the most terrible trial. Any other king, including Richard the Lionheart, would have immediately boarded a ship and sailed home to hide his shame. But Louis was different from the others. He believed that this disgrace was his personal fault. He had failed the mission God entrusted him to. He could not return home without atoning for his guilt. And instead of sailing to France, he gives the order to sail to Acre, to what remained of the kingdom of Jerusalem. And he stays there for 4 years. He no longer acted as a conqueror. He had no army. He became a mason. He spent what remained of his money and money sent from France not on war, but on walls. He personally supervised the reconstruction of the fortifications of Acre, Jaffa, and Caesarea. He lived like a monk in penance. He returned to France in 1254, not as a hero, but as a broken pilgrim. He became the best king France had ever known. He built hospitals, reformed the courts, and became the arbiter of Europe. But all those years, the thought of his failure burned him. The vow he took on his deathbed burned him. He believed he was not finished, and 16 years later, in 1260, the old and sick King Louis, despite the tears and pleas of his entire court, once again took the cross. He had to try, one last time. 20 years have passed since the humiliation in Egypt. Louis IX is a living legend. He is Saint Louis, the arbiter of Europe, the most respected man in Christendom. But he has never forgiven himself for his failure. He is old. He is sick. France begs him to stay. His advisors tell him that the age of Crusades is dead, that the East is lost. But Louis does not listen. He believes this is his last chance to fulfill the vow given to God. He assembles the Eighth Crusade. But where does he sail? Not to Egypt, not to Acre. He sails to Tunis. Why? This decision baffles historians to this day. His brother, Charles of Anjou, convinced him that the emir of Tunis was ready to convert to Christianity. It was either naivety or cynical political manipulation. But Louis, the idealist, believed it. He thought he would convert the emir to Christianity and gain an ally. In July 1270, the army lands on the ruins of Carthage. The emir, of course, had no intention of being baptized. Instead of allies, they were met by an enemy army. They were met by the scorching African sun. And they were met by disease. The camp, pitched in unsanitary conditions, erupted. Dysentery, typhus, and perhaps the plague began to mow down the army. Soldiers died by the hundreds. On August 25, 1270, in that same camp, lying on a bed of ash as a sign of repentance, Louis IX, the Saint King, died. His final crusade had never even begun. He died on the shores of Africa, never having reached the Holy Land. The death of Louis IX in Tunis became the true finale. It was the last breath, the last pure impulse of the Crusades. He stands as a tragic figure. He appeared as the best of kings and the worst of crusaders. His holiness, his faith, his idealism, this is what made him a genius ruler in France. He created a just court system, built hospitals for the poor, and became the moral compass for all of Europe. But that very same idealism made him blind in war. He did not see the trap at Mansurah because he believed God was guiding him. He fell into captivity because he could not be cynical. He died in Tunis because he believed a naive fairy tale about the emir's conversion. Louis IX remained a knight of a bygone era, trying to fight in a world where the rules were no longer written by faith, but by the ruthless tactics of slave warriors. And while Louis lay dying in Tunis, a man ruled in Egypt who was his total opposite, a man who knew neither faith nor mercy, a slave who became a sultan, the very general who lured Louis's army into the trap at Mansurah. And in the next episode, we will tell the story of his enemy. We will tell of the man who stopped the Mongols and who systematically, castle by castle, began to wipe the last traces of the Crusaders off the face of the earth. This will be the story of Baibars, the Avenger. If you enjoyed this story about the tragedy of a saintly king, please support us with a like and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what you think. Was Louis a hero, or was his idealism a crime? See you in the next episode.